if you have a bunch of really smart people who are really motivated, you can bring on the expertise you need and make the right decisions. Yeah, so I think that's the way I built my team is overall our team is on the younger side, but we've done things in drug discovery that no one else has ever done. I do think it's a general rule about the world that the world is more malleable than it maybe feels, where if you have a good idea and you're just like smart and you just pursue it endlessly, I think like you can just like bend the world.
This is the Nucleate Podcast, the voice of the next generation of biotech leaders.
Hello, welcome to the Nucleate Podcast. My name's Ben and I'm here with Anastasia. Today we have on Armand Cognetta. He's the founder and CEO of General Proximity, a biotech company pioneering induced proximity therapeutics for traditionally undruggable disease targets. Trained as a chemical biologist in Ben Cravat's lab at the Scripps Research Institute, Armand has authored over 20 peer-reviewed publications and holds patents foundational to multiple biotech ventures. Prior to founding General Proximity, he contributed to the proteomics initiatives at InZen Therapeutics, an early-stage flagship pioneering company, and completed Y Combinator as a solo founder. In January 2025, under Armand's leadership, General Proximity emerged from stealth mode, announcing a $16 million funding round to advance its proprietary OmniTac platform. This platform enables precise modulation of disease-driving proteins, opening therapeutic avenues for conditions such as cancer, cardiometabolic diseases, neurodegeneration, and issues related to lifespan. The oversubscribed seed round was led by Aydin Senkut at Felicis, with participation from Y Combinator, Age One, Modi Ventures, and Wilson Sonsini. General Proximity is actively expanding its team and is hiring for various positions across multiple departments, including roles in biology, chemical biology, platform development, and business development. Current openings are listed on their career page. Beyond his scientific endeavors, Armand writes about creativity, founder psychology, and decision-making frameworks, exploring the intersection of platform biology, entrepreneurial intensity, and reflective thinking.
Thank you for joining the Nucleate Podcast, Armand.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, amazing. Let's dive right in. And the first questions that we ask in our podcast are usually about the background of our guest. Specifically, let's go back to your childhood. So can you start there? Tell us a little bit about your upbringing, how you grew up, and what themes were you thinking about, and what basically influenced your path back then?
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up in the South. I grew up in northern Florida, about 20 or 30 minutes from Georgia. So I had a kind of interesting, I think, upbringing in that my dad's a physician and he's done a bunch of research. He's a kind of more scientifically oriented physician, and has done some really cool things. And he was the one who kind of instigated my love for science. But other than that, I didn't have a ton of like intellectual influences. I think like I grew up in a really wholesome, beautiful town, but I didn't really have anything scientifically that really grabbed me early on, other than just like I like understanding how things work. But I think one thing I did have, I read a lot as a kid. I read a huge amount of fantasy, and I still do. I think that actually was one of my like probably one of my bigger influences in terms of just being a founder. Maybe I think Ender's Game was maybe a book that played a big role in my psyche growing up. Maybe too much in that it's like this person who's like it's this young kid who's getting convinced. He's getting basically incepted by these military officials that he has to save the world and he can't rely on anyone. And I think this is like kind of common founder mindset. Not especially healthy perhaps in some ways, but also I think can be useful. And yeah, I think I just I just was always really obsessed with like, how can you make the world a better place, and like how it feels to, I think like fiction has always played a huge role in my life, and that there's just lessons in it that you don't get from nonfiction. Like what it feels like to change the world, right? Which is if you boil down a lot of fantasy and science fiction and fiction novels, that's what they kind of get to. And so I think that was a really big part of my upbringing. And then, as I was a huge nerd growing up, but I didn't have like I was also a little lost. And by the time I got to high school, it was like the hard challenge of my life was like being cool and social. And in the South, that meant like, drinking in the woods. And so I had like a whole period that I think of as like my misspent youth where I just was a little lost. I had a lot of fun, I guess, but kind of like lost some of my intellectual pursuits, and it was just um, kind of wandering. And went to college, joined a fraternity, which was also fun and not the most sort of intellectually stimulating. I mean, it was amazing in certain ways. I have some incredible friends from that, and I do think it shaped a part of me, and that I can be I'm a huge nerd, but I also I think I can have fun too and connect with people. But I like in college, I was pretty lost. I started off as a chemistry major because like it was like okay, like that's the cool field of science. That's what I talked to my dad about a lot, and but I didn't really have it. It wasn't connected to anything bigger for me, and it was like I was learning chemical reactions that people had discovered in the 1850s, and and then just like kind of regurgitating things that people had already done, and it didn't feel meaningful or impactful, and I was like pretty lost, and I just kind of kept uh, I was like existentially depressed, I think, or I just didn't have meaning in my life, and I got to the point where I stopped going to class and was just partying too much, and basically had to take a year off from college because of my grades. And I got really lucky through no through really no merit of my own. I think I got really lucky to go intern at Al-Nylam. I took some time off and I moved to Cambridge, or I moved to Boston and interned at Al-Nylam. And I was putatively their very first intern, and that was a super, super transformative experience because it was the first time I was like, oh, science matters. And like, I'm doing like my first week there, they're like, go figure out this HPLC method for something that we're using for our drugs that we're making, right? And all right, I built a method that I helped develop a method that they use to quantify siRNA delivery to tissues that last I heard they were still using. And that felt really, really different of like, okay, I'm doing science and like it matters to people. And so I think that was a huge shift. And it kind of brought me back to like, this is what I want to do with my life. I can, Al Nylam is like the poster child of a good platform company. You build a new technology and things that weren't possible before become possible. So I just got obsessed with like, how do you leverage yourself by building new technologies that can do things that weren't possible before. So that was just like massively kind of formative experience in my life. And maybe as I was also struggling through this period, I also another kind of really formative thing was I randomly just stumbled on Paul Graham's blog, like 2010 or something, and it's just the way he lucidly talks about startups and how they like let you impact the world in such a big way, and the sort of creative freedom you get and the skin in the game, and I don't know, it was super attractive to me, and just kind of got obsessed with that, and it started this whole journey of trying to think about like, if I started a company, what would it be? How to have good ideas, how to be this kind of person, and so yeah, so went out on, after on Island, finished college with a pretty poor GPA, applied to 15 PhD programs, got rejected from all of them, and was still pretty lost, still trying to figure things out. And but really luckily got an internship in Ben Cravat's lab, or no, or sorry, a research. I was a research tech in Ben Cravat's lab, and had just like got. That was my first kind of experience into chemical biology, which I hadn't even. I was a biochemistry major, and I was a chemistry and then biochemistry major in college, and didn't even know what chemical biology was. And still, I think it's hard to define the difference, but there's a very clear difference, and got obsessed with that, and 6 months into my job there, Ben was like, "Do you just want to do your PhD with me instead?" And so I transitioned from a research tech to a grad student, and had lower pay, more hours, like more stress, but had a huge amount of fun just like working in one of the best chemical biology labs, and getting to just like build things and explore my creativity, and still had a struggle ahead of me. I still felt, especially in the beginning, I felt a lot of imposter syndrome. I was most of the other people in the lab had not had my sort of academic background and had been just like very successful in college, whereas I felt like I kind of a fuck up. But I just like I had my fun times behind me. I'm just gonna work harder than anyone else, and I'd also I'd really during this period too, I'd got really incepted on the concept of grit as that being the most important thing. It's like, you know, if you can just focus on something and not give up and be intelligent about how you chase it, but just never ever give up, you can, that's how amazing things happen. And my first 2 years of my PhD were a struggle, nothing was working, kind of classic PhD story. But then, I just kept at it and I worked super hard and ended up having just a blast, like playing around in so many different fields of chemical biology and working on all sorts of cool projects internally and externally and having secret projects and thinking about how to build new stuff. And so, yeah, I think hopefully that answers the question.
Armand, that was really inspiring. I think there's like a lot of students and people in that sort of similar arc of experience listening right now who are also probably going through a lot of what you went through, right? Like your grades don't do as well as you hoped for, your experiments don't work out, and you sort of feel like a failure. And I think as, we as students, um, we think that, we have to do incredibly well. If we want to be able to start a company, then um, we have to sort of get into our PhD programs, get all of the credibility straight away. So I feel like I'm wondering, what would you say to a student or to someone else who has these like grand ambitions, but maybe has had a string of failures recently? How do you dig yourself out of that hole?
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, maybe some trite advice, but people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in a decade. And I think really just setting your timelines a little longer can help. And you know, like the people who are most successful are the people who love what they're doing and who can just be obsessed with it. And so I once asked Scott Alexander how he wrote so much, and he was like, or what his best writing advice was. He's just like, oh, it's just something that I love doing. And it's like that was it. It was like find something that you love doing, and you'll just do it a huge amount. So I think that I think that's the answer is to really just yeah, I mean, you need to find something where you think you might not feel it right away. Also, I think that's a tough challenge. Cal Newport has written about this, where sometimes the best jobs come after like 3 or 4 years or 5 or 6 years of working at them until you get into the period where you're in flow and you have more resources and people like respect you. But you want to find something where you think that's possible, and then you just want to. I think you just like want to just like not give up. And I do think part of this is toughness. I think like um, yeah, I also got another kind of period of my grad school was getting obsessed with David Goggins, who has a whole, it's a whole thing, and I don't think like being purely David Goggins is maybe the best life strategy, but I do think it's very directionally correct for a lot of people, and I think you should actually be able to combine it with sort of the other end of the spectrum. I think that's a really important thing. Like I think, for example, modern therapy culture is all the way on the other end of the spectrum, where it's like figure out what your problems are, label them, be nice to yourself. And I think that's so important. But I also think you need to just like be able to be a badass and just like tough it out and never give up. And I think if you combine both of those at the same time, I think that's what makes people excellent. So yeah, I would say like, figure out a way to just get inspired and just like work harder than anyone else. I think it's becoming easier to work harder than other people. I think like um, I mean, I don't know if that's true actually, but it does seem like maybe that's the generational thing where everyone thinks the generation below them works less hard or something. But I do think like there's always room to work hard, really work hard and be excellent. And especially maybe one other little piece of this is if you can like find an area where you're combining two fields. And the chemical biology was like that for me, where it's like I'm not the best chemist, I'm not the best biologist, but I can combine both of those in a way that puts me in a kind of percent of people that just can't do what a really good chemical biologist can do. So I think yeah, finding that area where it's like building your own monopoly, where you just feel really excited about working really hard at something in a way that you think will bring value to the world. in the long run.
That makes a lot of sense. And staying in this theme of advice for listeners who are grad students, some members, or maybe already have been through this program and maybe already have started their own company, I think most of the time the question is, which you also alluded a little bit, is A, finding the meaning of your life, and B, if you have this realization, oh, I think I'm entrepreneur and I think I need a problem that I need to solve this in this way by starting a company. The big question is, if you have an idea, is it a good enough idea? Should I, kind of go and focus on it? Or on the other side, if you have this realization, I want to start a company, but you're looking for the ideas, there are so many things that you think is a good idea, but turn out they not being well enough. So can you give us a glimpse of your thought processes? And you also wrote a blog article on finding good ideas. So a little bit of summary of your thoughts and what our listeners can learn from you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think creative ideation is a skill that can be practiced and learned, and you can actually get better at it. And I don't think you necessarily need that to start a company. I think your co-founder can have the idea. You just need one good idea, right? But I do think it can be really useful, and for me, it's really fun. And so, when I was in grad school, I just got obsessed with it. Like, where do good ideas come from? And I had a group of friends called like the Brain Trust. We had a group chat called our Brain Trust or something. And I would just text dumb ideas to them, and like just like having that like kind of social mechanism of like nerding out about ideas. But I think like high level good ideas come from connecting things, right? They can come from connecting disparate things that haven't been connected before, and to so your top of funnel is how many things come into to you, right? Like how broadly you read, like not just within a specific field but across different fields, what your kind of information diet is. So I think the first thing is to really think hard about your information diet. I think for me I love taking in information, and so I had just all sorts I always have all sorts of ways that I just like read things. I have like I still use RSS religiously. I have all these like random blogs of random people who are just like totally like not in my space, maybe have like 20 followers, but just like will every now and then write some really interesting thing that puts my head in a different space. And all sorts of things like that, right? Podcasts can be great for this too. There's a million pieces of information, and I think just yeah, really kind of bring thinking about what kind of information you take in, and then kind of ruminating on that is a really powerful first step. And then yeah, I think I think this is actually a really common thing when you're an early grad student, where you have ideas and you're like convinced they're great, and then you realize like someone thought of this like 30 years ago, or it's like actually really not actually super a great idea. And I think that's where a lot of people can get stuck is like, oh, they have these epiphanies and then like, it's actually not a good idea, and then they just stop. And I think that's actually a very common arc of the creative process in general, in art or anything, where it's like you first like start to see that good ideas exist, and you can notice them and recognize them before you can have ideas that are as good. Right? It's like with writing, like what a good book is, and then you try to write and you're like, God, I'm fucking terrible at writing. And I think there's a really similar thing there where you just kind of got to push through that. You just got to like, put in the time, keep having ideas, and turn your brain into a model that spits out ideas, like that like looks for problems, and just like and when a problem comes up, your brain's like, what do I have in here that I've learned that I could combine and into a solution for this. Or it can also be Feynman I think has written about this, where you have all these solutions, you have these patterns or frameworks you've thought, and you apply them to every problem you found. And I think just like having that as kind of a background program is something you can just like set up by kind of being obsessed with having ideas. And then you just kind of keep having ideas. I think for me, I think it's really important to write them down, to kind of yeah, make them a little more real, and then to come back and think about them. And I have hundreds of ideas written down, and almost all of them are terrible. And like I think that's normal. I think you should expect that. But you just need one or two that are really great. And I had the idea for this company for general proximity in the shower. And actually a bunch of my best ideas, smaller ideas, like but come from the shower, where there's some special way in which you're relaxed and your kind of prefrontal cortex is turned off or something, and you're just and like connections start happening. And so yeah, I had it. I had it. It was a shower thought, and then I just was obsessed with it. I like couldn't stop thinking about it. It's like I know someone's going to build this. It's either going to be me or someone else much later, but like this is going to be the future. And it kind of survived the sunshine of me like thinking about it, talking about it with friends. Like 2 months later, I was more obsessed with it, not less obsessed with it. I think that's a good sign. And then, I think for me, there's another piece of it too, which um, is that, the impact needs to be there, where almost the idea for the company was a combination of this technology plus how we were going to apply it to a specific target or kind of a few targets. And I think that was a really big piece of this, where it was like there was like just this very clear impact of like this is, no one knows when you have a new idea. No one knows if it's really possible, right? I do think it's a general rule about the world that the world is more malleable than it maybe feels, where if you have a good idea and you're just like smart and you just pursue it endlessly, I think like you can just like bend the world. And I think that's how a lot of things happen. I think that's just like a useful heuristic. Not always true, but useful to directionally think that. And yeah, so I think for me, it was like, I want to work on something where, yeah, you never know if it's really going to pan out, but I want to work on something that like, if I failed, I would be happy that I spent time on it, right? It's not incremental. Like there's a quote I love from Rainer Rilke that's like, the purpose of life is to fail at greater and greater things or something like that, which I'd rather succeed, but I think it's also a good heuristic to just like go after really big things. And there's just a magic to doing hard things that doesn't exist when you're doing more incremental stuff.
Ultimately, I think there are different opinions out there. So there are also people who say if you aren't obsessed and you don't see the problem itself, or like, or instead just, kind of really looking for the ideas to start the company, that's not the right start. So curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think like in some ways that was my journey, right? It was like I like thought startups were like a really great way to impact the world, and then I just got obsessed with them, and it was maybe 10 years until I had an idea that I was like I feel obsessed with enough to kind of jump off the cliff for. So, but yeah, I do think there's a kind of flip side of this where I do think there is startups have become more glamorous in some ways, and there's like a way that there's people who like kind of LARP being a founder, and like they like the idea of being a founder without actually doing it, or they'll like go after something that seems sexy but is maybe not impactful. So yeah, I think it's a tough question. There's a balance there where like being a founder is super fucking hard, and especially in biotech right now, it is not. You gotta like have a level of like being willing to just like chew glass. And I don't think like that has to happen, but I would want people to really be convinced that like they are willing to like sacrifice a lot. And I personally think I have the best job in the world. So I don't want to make it sound like it's like terrible or anything. I love what I do so much. But yeah, I think you should really yeah, you should be obsessed with something. Maybe that's the best way, but you should just be obsessed with something. It doesn't have to be your solution, it doesn't have to be your technology. Just like, you should be obsessed with changing the world in some way. And I think if you are, startups are the best way to do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And this part about suffering, but also loving it, I feel everyone who went through the PhD journey has this kind of
Yeah.
masochism in him or herself, that basically, even though you suffered all this 4 or 5 years, in the end of the day, you loved what you're doing and you were curious enough to stay in the nights in the lab. And after you're done, you're lacking this stimulation. So you go out and like go and start a company and then spend endless nights about something that you're really obsessed there. And yes, it's hard. It's long hours. As you said, it's not sexy, but it's very reforming and you're doing great things.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a great example. Yeah, PhDs themselves, like if you finish your PhD or you go through a PhD, like, um, in some ways that's harder than a startup, right? You have less support and there's less upside in some ways. So yeah, I think it's a great kind of analogy. And I think people who've like really gone through a PhD and been like, yeah, let's do that again, are like going to be great founders. And I think the world is still kind of learning that in some ways where especially in biotech, where it's still in at least the VC-led tradition, it's more common to have management teams and blah blah blah. But I think if you've like gone through a PhD and you're the most technical person about your subject, and you have the support to like learn business, which is easier than doing a PhD, right? Yeah, I think I do think there's still a narrative shift that needs to happen where like you could crush your PhD and go straight to being a founder and be absolutely incredible. And I still think there's like a reticence in biotech that doesn't exist in tech, where people in tech are like, oh yeah, you dropped out of Stanford, you're going to be a killer founder, right? And I think in biotech people are not quite there yet, at least some of the people, and I think that actually will change, I think.
Okay, so let's summarize how to good ideas. First, be curious, read a lot. Second, be aware that this is a skill that you can train. So think of ideas and write them down, evaluate them, and if the idea is over this hype of the initial hype, then maybe that's something that you should think more about. And third, as it seems, have a lot long showers or take long,
Find
long showers.
find things that it doesn't have to be a shower. I think that's good for me. I think yeah, find areas. Just find the ways that your brain spits out ideas. Like when you're most relaxed. It could be walking, yoga for me. It can also be like that. Any exercise. It could be right before bed. You just have a pad by your bed, stuff like that. And yeah, just figure out a way to turn on that machine in your brain that spits out ideas, and then figure out the circumstances in which it is sort of most active.
And you mentioned that the idea for general proximity was in the shower, and it took 10 years to actually, like, it was 10 years in the making. So, can you share a little bit more detail about what the idea was, or like what was the raw idea, what was the aim, and how it evolved over time?
Yeah.
And would you say right now it's the same idea, or did it evolve from then to now?
No, I mean, it's the same exact idea actually. Yeah, even before I incorporated the company, like the thing I said we were going to build and the target we're going to work on is the same one. In my YC app, I had it. So, yeah, I think it's the power of a really good idea. I think so. I think some people will tell you good ideas aren't useful, and I think that's not true. I think execution is also really important, but I think finding the right idea and just obsessively pursuing it is actually a really key part. But yeah, so I think like a lot of it started when in Ben's lab, where I got obsessed with chemical biology, and there's something just beautiful about chemical biology to me, where it's this half art, half science. You have these beautiful building blocks, small molecules that can do all sorts of things. Small molecules are they come in and out of vogue in some ways, but they're still, I think, the most impactful therapeutic modality. And I think that is only going to kind of continue to grow, actually, as a few trends kind of continue to mature in drug discovery. And yeah, and so like a lot of my PhD was on chemical biology and then phenotypic drug discovery, which is still, I think, one of the most important ways to discover drugs. And so I just really incepted on like, wow, if you can make a good small molecule, you can build a good phenotypic assay, if you can use good tools to enable that, like at the time I was doing a lot of chemoproteomics, you just like you can make things that are just so valuable, and you can understand biology in ways that you couldn't before. And yeah, I really just do think that small molecules just are just like so valuable in terms of like how the just unsexy, but their price, right? How easy they are to make. Um, their ability to be taken orally, to get into cells, to permeate well, to get into the CNS, which is still just like really hard for other modalities. So I just always thought, like in a way, I was like a little anxious. Is like, is this maybe large molecules, maybe CRISPR is going to be the next big thing, but I think I really do believe that there is a huge future for small molecules where you take what exists and then add on to it with new technologies. And so that's what we're doing at General Proximity, is that um, we're basically developing a new class of medicines, which we call next-gen induced proximity therapeutics. So basically, small molecule drugs that work through proximity and that do things beyond degradation. So if people don't know about the PROTAC space, I'm sure most do, but really high level, there's also a new field in drug discovery, which is super hot, which is PROTACs or targeted protein degradation, which are small molecules that work through proximity. Specifically, they recruit an E3 ligase to a drug target to induce the degradation of the target. And that field is awesome. It's the only modality, bar none, that lets you systemically control the abundance of a protein in a human, especially with a drug you can take orally, right? And nothing else lets you do that. And yet, our kind of thesis for general proximity that from day one was like, degradation is awesome, but of the things that you can do with proximity, it's like the least interesting one. There's just like many, many therapeutic transformations that are really valuable that are impossible to do with any modality. That if you could kind of use proximity for, you could suddenly achieve, and you could do it with small molecules. So maybe another lens we really like is that proximity itself is just one of the master regulators of biology. So just high level, huge amounts of biology are controlled by like two things being put near each other, right? Like a cell is a container to like hold things together so chemical reactions can happen. There's all sorts of proteins that do this. It happens on every scale. Um, and and it's also turned out that many drugs that were discovered phenotypically in the past turned out to work through proximity. And I think that actually the trend will continue. It's a sort of general phenomenon. Nature makes natural products that do this. Rapamycin is a great example. There are others too, though. So basically, the idea was like, look, proximity is a master regulator of biology. Why don't our drugs work this way? And so we kind of set out to be the first platform that can then kind of systemically prosecute this space. And so if you want to make a proximity drug for something beyond degradation, like activation, refolding, gain of function, relocalization, modulation, etc., it's not obvious sort of what mechanism to use. So if you look at your genome, like 10% of your genome codes for proteins that modify their proteins. So every cell in your body has this huge set of tools, like proteins, enzymes, that modulate, that like do biology. They make things, they turn things on, off, move them around, etc. There's like 200 different PTMs in humans, all the PTM readers, writers, erasers, all the chaperone proteins, trafficking proteins, adapter proteins. There's just like many, many just like tools that exist in biology that we thought like if you could co-opt those or hijack those, you could basically vastly increase this sort of therapeutic armamentarium, like the toolkit of things you can use to do biology. And like, most drugs, small molecules, drugs, other than for GPCRs, I guess, are inhibitors, right? We're great at breaking stuff, which is kind of crazy. It's like most drugs, it's like, something's broken in a human, let's go break something else to fix it, which works. But, there's just many other things that could be possible that people haven't gone after because it's very hard for a small molecule or any other modality to fix something, to relocalize something, to activate it, to change its function. So the idea was like, look, if you look at what we call the effectome, and it's kind of interesting, there was no name for this up until now, the set of all proteins that modify other proteins. So we call it the effectome. But if you kind of look at that from a therapeutic angle, if you could repurpose that for drug discovery, you could use it to modulate drug targets in ways that were previously impossible, and you could do it with small molecules, right? So I think that's just like a huge part of this is in the long run, there's like many targets that, you can use a small molecule that you will be able to use a small molecule for that are just, you know, maybe some target that you need to hit systemically that people might have thought about for a gene therapy, but you can't deliver a gene therapy to a human systemically. But you find the right proximity mechanism, you can make a small molecule that does that much cheaper, in many ways safer, perhaps. Um, and yeah, and I think like, I think as I think a good way to think about this too is as like AI gets better as well, I think drugs can actually become simpler, right? Like the fewer atoms you use in your drug, the better in the long run. And I think if we can arbitrarily make a drug to do X, Y, or Z thing, it's, why not do it with a small molecule if you don't need to, like why use a larger molecule if you can get away with a smaller molecule? So I think so that's the kind of high level is like just really realizing that phenotypic drug discovery and small molecule drug discovery are massively important, right? Still, like most drugs are small molecules that are prescribed to patients. And it's like, can you take those and combine a new technology to like bring them into the future and allow small molecules to do things that are beyond the realm of any traditional small molecules or large molecules, gene therapies, whatever. But still retain all the the benefits of small molecules, like you could take them orally and they get it to cells, et cetera. So that was the idea behind the company. And so we built, our platform has always been built on kind of that concept is like, can you, for a given drug target, how do you find the best proximity mechanism to use to modulate that drug target that then makes also the chemistry of developing that molecule easier. So our platform is a tool to kind of prospect across the effectome, find the best mechanisms, and then use that as our kind of starting point for our discovery chemistry.
What would be a good example for our listeners to understand this, kind of on a more specific level, like any great target that you're looking at right now, or that you thought that this mechanism would be really beneficial?
Yeah, so we have some super cool targets. We haven't really shared any of them publicly, so maybe I'll just talk about them in high level. But yeah, so there are many, many targets in drug discovery where you have something that's broken, like a misfolded protein, an aggregated protein, or a protein that you need to turn on in some way. That's just very hard, again, to do with any modality. And so, I think there's many classes of these. One that we're excited about is sort of transcription. So, transcription factors are a class of proteins that are kind of canonically like very hard to drug, where they're these big proteins that interact with DNA and they don't have traditional small molecule binding sites. And but they are like kind of at the root of many diseases. Like your body is sort of orchestrated by transcription, and if you could not only there's a lot of gene therapy companies, for example, that are trying to make reprogramming things or delivering like a gene, like, and often those are transcription factors because they're just so powerful. And that's almost like a more basic version of what we think is possible, because like that's just like bulk delivery of this protein to the cell. That's a transcription factor that turns on. It's like there's more of the protein now. We think there's actually another level that's possible, which is that you can actually tune transcription. And so transcription factors are very complex proteins that sort of orchestrate all biology, and they do so even more so than most other proteins. Like almost all proteins are controlled by proximity in some way. Pretty much every protein, I would say, actually is, but even more so than the average protein, transcription factors are controlled by proximity, where like your transcription factor often will sit in the cytosol and some signal will happen. The cell will, sense something, and that will cause some other protein to come in and modify your transcription factor in a way that makes it go to the nucleus and then interact with a specific kind of DNA sequence, right? So most transcription factors, like they have many different kind of downstream genes that are not always turned on at once. And so the way this happens is through proximity. So many transcription factors have like, hundreds or thousands of interacting partners that modulate every level of their function. And so we kind of thought like, look, if that's true, you could probably drug them better with proximity than what people have tried in the past, which is, trying to find a small molecule that binds to them, which is hard, or gene therapies, which has, delivery challenges and stuff. But if you're gonna try to modulate them with proximity, which proximity event do you use? And that's what our platform solves. It says like, for a given drug target, can you find a proximity event that modifies that target in a way that gives you a phenotype you want? So there's transcription factors that are at the root of everything, right? Like, there's ones that control mitochondrial biogenesis or like autophagy or like tumor suppression, and just like literally every process in your body at some level is controlled by transcription. And so if you can gain kind of fine-tooth control over that, I think you just suddenly gain the ability to make drugs that are really beyond the realm of anything that's possible right now.
And you also mentioned the like genetic editing. So what I have been curious, and uh, excuse me if it's a stupid question, but basically what this, kind of this, what you described, this mechanism of turning off genes is something that we see in epigenetic modification as well. So curious about where do you see like what your approach, replace this genetic like epigenetic editing approach, or do you think that there are two different use cases for each of them, and this would be more synergistic approach for like both?
Yeah, it's a great question. I definitely have my own kind of bias here. So I'll try not to like talk bad about epigenetic editors and stuff because it's an amazingly cool field. But yeah, I mean, one problem again is delivery, right? It's hard to deliver any kind of payload for of a gene therapy to things beyond the liver, and people are working really hard at that, and that's definitely changing. But it's unclear if like you have again you have a target that you need to, or you have a that like you need to hit across your whole body or across every cell in an organ. I think it's really unclear when that'll be possible with the gene therapy. So yeah, I think like if your target is in the liver, I think gene therapies might just end up being better. But again, I think there's also there's sort of advantages and disadvantages to both. You know, um, the safety might be better in some ways with one and in other ways with the other, right? If you're delivering a gene, it might be hard to turn that off, right? And it's a little scary to say like I'm just gonna edit an epigenome in someone and just like that's gonna just like be how they are now. But maybe with a small molecule, you have like a little bit more temporal control. And I think there's also ways you can combine both of these two, definitely, actually, where you have small molecules that maybe induce a proximity event with an artificial editor that you've added that kind of give you extra control. So I think there's synergy. Yeah, I don't really try to think of it as like there's competition. For us, I just try to work on things that are very clearly in our bailiwick and are extremely impactful. And like that's my hack is that I want to go after targets where it's like if you make a drug for this, like it's very clearly like massively going to change the world, and you don't have to like do like market calculation or worry about like some epigenetic editor is going to come in and modify it. And there's just so many targets like that yeah, I think both are really valuable, and I'm very happy people are working on every aspect of this.
That makes a lot of sense. So it seems that after you had this idea in the shower, clearly you also went through the idea maze on it, and it's evolved since then. The decision of whether you want to be a platform or an asset company. I'm curious, what was the timeline or sequence of events of how your thoughts unfolded and how this idea kind of was sent out into the world and what sort of feedback you received that allowed you to refine it?
Yeah. Yeah, so a platform asset company is a really interesting distinction, and it still annoys me that, and someone needs to solve this, and I like that it annoys me that there's not a name for companies that do both platform and assets at the same time, right? I think those are the best companies. Like Alnylam was a great example of this. There's many examples of this, and that's always what we've wanted to be. It's like we're building a new technology and we're applying it such that we're making our own drugs. And yeah, we can partner it, but we're not just like purely here's our platform, give it to pharma. And I think it's really important because like I think if you're actually developing a new technology, if you really have something that's new, suddenly new things become possible, right? And of those things, some of them will be high impact, some will be low impact, and some will be hard and some will be easy. And but there'll be many new things, and there'll be like very useful things to work on that are on average like more high impact and more easy compared to like the average target. Because you're just by virtue of like you've done something new and something new, like all these new things become possible. So I think it's almost like if you actually have a new technology and a new platform, it's like to me, if you're not using it to develop your own drugs, you're kind of fooling yourself of like the value of your new technology. I think pharma has thousands of people every year who are like, here's this technology. Now can you use it to make drugs for me? I think it's very valuable to dog food your own product, right? If you're developing a platform, like it will be better if you also use it just internally to make assets and it just helps you understand the drug discovery process more and like what's important to build into your platform. Um, so yeah, I think we're a bit of platform and asset and name of that TBD. And then yeah, the reception, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, very early on, I think one of the really hard things for me was I was just terrible at fundraising. I came at it with a very scientific mindset. I was like, here's what we've done. I communicated like a very rigorous scientist, which is good, I think. But it was like, here's what we've done, which is nothing because I have no money, and here's all the caveats, and here's why things are hard, and blah blah blah, which is like not attractive to investors, really, not really your job as a fundraiser. And also like I went through YC in January. My YC batch started January 2020, and I opened the lab February 2020. It's just me, and then COVID started, and and my batch got shortened. The demo day was virtual at the last minute. My actual demo day was like a week after the market crash, and I had no team, no IP, no data. And so my first fundraise was a complete disaster. I was trying to raise 2 million to build a technology, and I raised like 25K or something. Um, and I always remember the people who believed in this that early on when I was so bad at fundraising and like, but who still saw the kind of power of the idea. But yeah, so I had a really kind of tough early fundraise. I was also had a huge amount of imposter syndrome where I was like, like again, this isn't the only way to, when you have a platform, it's an art to pick targets. And it's super fun, I think, but there's no like rule to it, and there's different ways to do it. But for me, it was always like, I just want to pick things that are I don't want to do a market calculation. I just want to like pick things that are like really valuable, and like I just know if it works, there will be it will be massive. And that's what I did. And we picked the most valuable target in our space basically to work on. And then I went out and I was like embarrassed to even talk about it to investors because it's like, who am I to, this target people failed at for decades. And like, who am I to like pitch it to investors? And like, who am I to be the one to drug it, whatever, like, why would I be the one who figured it out after so many people failed? But it made sense logically. It was like a target that had perfect platform disease fit for us. Really just perfect. But yeah, so I had a really long period of like getting over that and like feeling okay to like say, here's what we're working on, and to feel okay like pitching with integrity, while still selling, which was really hard for me as a scientist. Meaning like, my job was actually to be selling a vision of what was possible with money, right? And to be able to do that in a way that was like, I believe this is possible. Like, I don't have some part of me that one of the biggest things I fixed was that when I used to pitch, I just had this imposter syndrome part of myself that was like, you can't do this, right? It's just like I think it's a really common thing. Like, why are you the one to do this? And I think the way that actually manifests when you're pitching is like, if you have one part of yourself that's saying, I can do this, here's this big thing, and another part of yourself that's saying, I can't do this. The way that dissonance manifests is as inauthenticity, like bad vibes. And I think like investors invest based off that. Like that's like one of the I really think that's actually a really big part of like, do they sense that you really are a smart person and you believe like with integrity, with high authenticity in what you're doing. And so I did a huge amount of like just a lot of inner work. And actually one of the things I should have done earlier is get a coach. I have an amazing coach now. I always like, oh no, I can't afford a coach. It's not important compared to all the other problems. I should have done it so much earlier. I got an amazing coach who's really good at IFS or parts work. Did a bunch of work on just like, why do these parts of me like believe this? And like, can I like retain my scientific integrity, rigor without, can I fundraise well and sell well without losing that? And it turned out the answer is definitely yes. And it's just that it's not that I'm selling certainty. I think it's your job as a founder to sell better risk. That's what VCs are buying. They're buying risk, and you want to sell them better risk. And if you really believe in what you're doing and it's really impactful, that changes the expected value, right? And there's a really big period of learning for me in terms of like how to fundraise well, which is just like doing this inner work so I could look investors in the eyes and be like, what we're doing is going to change the world. And it's like the most important thing to work on. And just to be able to say that with authenticity, I think was a really yeah, it was a really big unlock. And I still get people, I literally had a pitch today where um, I talked about our main target with this well-known VC fund, and they're like, there's only two targets I tell people that they can never work on, and that's one of them. And I think that's how pharma is, or that's how biotech is. There's a lot of conservatism, and but things are just impossible until they become possible, and someone's got to be first. And I think it's like good to be polarizing in a way. Uh, like, you don't want to be bland. You don't want everyone to like kind of like you. You want some people to think you're an idiot and like you're crazy, and other people to be like, fuck yes. That's what you want. Because you only need 2% of the people, 1% of the people you pitch to like you to be successful. And like no matter what, like either 99 or 100% of the people you pitch to are gonna say no, right? So I think it's like for me, it's always just been this useful principle to just like go after really big things that you believe you can do, and you look long enough, you'll find people who like share your vision and like get it. Like if this works, the world changes. Like that's what VC is looking for. They're not looking for, at the end of the day, Well, maybe the revealed preferences are a little different, but at the end of the day, what returns funds are the outliers, and I think that's what you want to go after. And I think it's just a better. I mean, it's just been feels like such a hack where I don't ever have to worry about if what we're doing is meaningful. I don't ever have to motivate my team. They know like if what we do works, the world changes, and so yeah, I think it's been a journey though to get there. And there's just so much negativity and rejection, even if you're successful. I think like one of the things I've really been working on recently is what I think of as like my negativity refractory period, where like as a founder, you just all of the negativity of the company gets filtered to you because all the easy things, all the happy things, like other people deal with because those are fun, and like so you get like you get all the hard problems, and then you get all the rejection from the VCs and or when you're hiring people, whatever. And I do think that's a really key thing is to be really good at just being positive, like staying positive and not quitting. And I think you're always gonna have like down periods. Like startups just go like this. It's crazy. It's just like ridiculous. You think like you don't have that like 5 years in, and you still have. And I think you just like and some way you just like get used to it. You realize like, oh, I'm in one of the down periods. That means there's an up period coming, and it kind of calms your nervous system a little. But I think it's really important. It's one of the things I've had to work on a lot is like when I get when when something bad happens or like some bump happens, which is the name of the game. It's not abnormal. How it's like, yeah, you're gonna feel bad maybe for a little. How quickly do you snap back into kind of positivity? And it's one of the things I love about running a company is that I get to learn. I'm like almost like forced to learn stuff like that, which is useful for every aspect of my life, not just being a founder. It's like you get your face pushed into reality as a founder, and like all of your flaws will come to the fore, and you just like have to fix them or you die. So it's a useful kind of growth mechanism, actually.
That sounds like torture. I feel like
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, I mean,
we're all statists.
type two fun. It's not any worse than a PhD. So
Probably true. Oh,
yeah.
I think that's really inspiring. You touched on essentially the concept that being a founder is really insanely difficult and it never really ends. Even in sort of late stage companies, you're still going through that. And imposter syndrome is almost guaranteed because at the beginning, you're really starting with nothing but an idea and you have to sell this dream. So it feels somewhat fraudulent from the beginning. Um,
Mhm.
you also mentioned that, the first time you were pitching VCs, you had to sort of sell them on what this could be before you actually had anything. But like, how did you sort of bridge that gap between this pitch that you had and like the work that you needed to demonstrate in order to, have some proof of concept that this is going to work?
How did I bridge the gap in terms of like how did I go from us having nothing at all to like starting to get data and building a picture of yeah.
Exactly. Like, there's so many students that want to start companies and they even have ideas, but they just don't know the sort of first steps to take.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I mean, I think this is one of the things where there's in advice, there's like a law of equal and opposite advice where you can say something and the opposite will be true for some people. But the question really is like, at its root, it's like explore versus exploit, right? Like when do you know you have a good enough idea and the kind of resources to go after it versus when do you kind of jump off the cliff? And so I do think for some people the answer is going to be very different than for other people, and you really need to know where you sit along that spectrum. And some people are more action oriented, and some people are more like let's learn it, let's get really prepared. So I think that will change the answer. But yeah, I think again there's like a balance. And for me, it was like okay, I know this idea. Like I had enough conviction in the idea that I was like I know this will happen. Like someone's going to do this. It might as well be me. So at that point, it was like, okay, let's just jump off the cliff. And I don't know if I told you guys this, but the way so I was at a flagship company and after my PhD, and I'd always been like, oh, I need to like spend 10 years in industry before I can start a company because I need to learn all these things. And then the company I was at was amazing, super cool science. I was building the platform there, but also it was like run really poorly. And I was like, oh yeah, if this is how flagship runs a company, I could run a company. Like I don't need, which is naive and directionally correct, but like they do some things really well. Like they have a shit ton of money, which actually can make up for a lot of problems, it turns out. Yeah, I think so. So for me though, it's like I know this is gonna happen. I could look around for a co-founder, I could, just think about it more, blah, 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 but I might as well just like start, right? And so I think and so while I was at this company, I randomly kind of was at a YC conference, pitched this idea to the president of YC at the bar. who had no idea what the fuck I was talking about because so I don't know if I'm allowed to curse, but anyways, he had no idea what I was talking about because he wasn't a scientist and I was terrible at my elevator pitch was not good, and it's hard to explain induced proximity to non-scientists without saying the word protein like 37 times. But luckily there was like a YC science partner who was like, "This is awesome. You should go to YC." And I literally was like, I mean, part of it was like I'm very narrative driven in some ways, where I was like, this would be a great story if I just quit my job the next day. So I did. And so I was like, I quit my job and went through YC and started building it. So I do think there is almost a way. And then maybe that's another kind of cure. I don't know if it's for everyone, and it's probably from my bias from loving good stories, but I was like, yeah, it's a better story if I just like jump off the cliff and figure it out. But yeah, and so and then I had all this, COVID stuff and didn't raise any money. And so then it was super hard. And I basically just didn't give up. I raised like 100K here, 200K there, got a little data, hired one person, and just did that for like 3 or 4 years. Like the average runway of the company in the first few years was like months. It was like brutal. We were literally at like $0 in the bank account at least once or twice. At one point, I liquidated my entire public stock portfolio to cover payroll, and like it was just like really, we were just like it was a tough time, and I missed the 2021 peak because I hadn't read enough history, and I didn't realize how much of an outlier that was. So I started raising in 2020, right after the market crash when everyone was like freaking out, and then had burned all the VCs over the next like 9 months. And then things got better, but I hadn't raised any money and hadn't done anything. So I think nothing to go back to VCs for. So yeah, I just like limped along and just just kind of pulled together a little money here, a little money there, and just didn't quit. And I think one of the things that really helped was I was like, yeah, what am I going to do if this company runs out of money? Or fails. And I was like, I'm just going to start another company doing the same thing. And because I believe in it so much. And so then I might as well just like keep this company alive because it's like less paperwork. So yeah, I think it was just a really long period of really, yeah, just not giving up and just figuring out a way to make it work and being super scrappy. And it made us really focused. And actually, in my YC batch, the Airbnb founders came and talked to us. They do for most batches in January before COVID started. And they're like, yeah, we started in 2008, financial crisis. There was no money. They're like selling cereal boxes to stay alive, and like there's a binder full of credit cards. You've probably heard the story, but they're like, but it was like the best thing we could have ever gone through. It made us so focused. And I remember like being like, that sounds like bullshit. Like it sounds like they just like made this like story up afterwards. And then I went through the same thing, and it really made us so focused. And when I first started the company, I was like, I need to hire like a management team who's like ex pharma, who knows how to run companies and blah blah blah. To now I'm just like the exact opposite. I'm like, keep most of those people should be kept far away from startups because like most biotechs, even in pharma, are just poorly run, I think. And there's not a lot of capital efficiency, there's not a lot of urgency, there's not a lot of speed. Yeah, going through that period really, we were super capital efficient, and now we have money, but we kind of kept that in our blood. So it was, I think like part of it is you're gonna have, no matter what, you're gonna have negative things that happen to your startup. And a really key skill is to find the good in them. And for us, the good was like finding how to, run the company better and be really capital efficient and making a good story out of it, I guess. So yeah, just never gave up. And then yeah, I got much better at pitching and fixed a bunch of stuff internally in terms of how I showed up to pitch, and eventually just finally after almost 4 years, I think I sent out an investor update. It was like 1,350 days or something. Like I had been trying to close an institutional investor for our seed round, which started in March 2020, right? And in January 2024, I closed an institutional lead after almost 4 years of looking. That was Felicis. And we just had incredible, it was like I pitched the idea and they were like, this is fucking awesome. Um and like just from day one, from the very beginning, it was like literally, I like had a call with them on a Friday afternoon. My mom was visiting, and I walked out and I was like, I just had the best fucking call. And then I was texting with the partner there, with the founder of it, Aiden, who's amazing, Aiden Sinkut. And all weekend he's like, doing ref checks and stuff. And then same on Monday. And then Tuesday, he was like, we want to lead the round we're in. And then they did another like month and a half of diligence but it was just like, holy shit, like you can have you can have conversations like this with people who are actually like first principles oriented and believe in what you're doing. And so, yeah, I think it was just never giving up and working on something that mattered. And like I would have quit if it was something more incremental. I would have quit because it wouldn't have been worth like putting myself through that. But it was, and we got through it, and it made us a much better company, I think.
That's super powerful. It feels like it would have been a lot easier at so many points in that journey to have quit, and you'd be in a different stage of your life doing something else right now, but you chose not to. And it kind of makes me think of the time that you had when you were younger and you were having those failures, in the lab and sort of being a little bit directionless. Do you feel like that period of your life was significant in your ability to tolerate these uncertainties, building a company?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't really, it didn't really feel like it made me better able to tolerate it because it was really tough. But it did like, it gave me like a narrative framework it gave me some mental model or mythos or something of like, this is a part of the journey, right? And there was a bunch of things that help with that. Like Angela Duckworth has a bunch of, research on grit, which I think I like watched her TED talk like 15 years ago. And like, that was like a key point. And my dad, just like my dad had always driven that home. His favorite book is Endurance, Shackleton's Journey, and like how insane that was, and this poem Invictus, and just like all these things that kind of came that. I mean, I guess it made it easier. It must have made it easier. It didn't necessarily feel easy, but it was like, at least I have this framework to know like this can be even if it feels like shit, this is a normal part of the journey, and there can be like really good things at the end of this, and all you have to do is not quit. So yeah, definitely going through that helps because you can read about it and then experiencing it is different. And I think like for me, one of the things that yeah, and then like seeing that pattern is really important because once you like know the pattern, then you see it everywhere, and then you add evidence to it, right? Internally, it's like the difference between like in intellectual knowledge and experiential knowledge or gut knowledge, where like it's like you could know a stove is hot. But if you've never touched a hot stove, it might not feel like that big of a deal. And then once you touched it once, you're like your body is like reacting to it in a way that's like, do not touch that, right? And there's a difference in those types of knowledge. So I think going through a lot of stuff helped a lot on a gut level. I got obsessed with endurance sports in grad school. I started a thing with my best friend called September, where every September we just did really hard shit. Um, I do really long runs. And I think like stuff like that, like you do a really long run and you go through this entire arc. It's like isomorphic. You go through this entire arc of a founder journey in like a day, right? Where you start, you feel like shit, you want to quit, and then 2 hours later it's like okay, maybe it's okay, and then and you finish and you feel amazing, right? And like you could do that in 10 hours, right? And it feels and it's like the same thing in some ways, just very compressed. So I think if you can really incept yourself on like this pattern is real and like you just notice when you're in it and like kind of just keep putting one foot in front of the other, you can get through a lot of stuff that feels very hard.
Absolutely. I've noticed a lot of founders have these, some sort of like a hobby or something that they do in their spare time that somewhat correlates to the founder journey. Um, whether it's a sport or hiking or running. I'm curious. It's one thing for you to persist in spite of this adversity. It's another thing to be able to recruit, hire, maintain amazing people despite the uncertainty. What did you learn from that in terms of, being able to bring on good people, but also retaining them and, keeping them while the company is suffering and while you're suffering?
Yeah, that's a great question because yeah, it is very different when other people are relying on you for their livelihood, when people have given you money, stuff like that. It adds an extra level of stress that you might not have if you're alone. Yeah, I mean, we did lose early on. We did lose a good amount of people. Where just like I, yeah, the company was chaotic and like we just like didn't have any certainty about money, and there was people who were on visas who like needed to know that like the company was going to exist in 2 months or else they'd be deported. And so we definitely early on we definitely had some turnover. And then I think like I got better at early on too. It was just like it was hard for me to fundraise. It was hard for me to pitch to people because I was like here's me, like I don't have any experience, but I think you should come work with me. And I guess I learned to trust myself. And actually some of that was like retrospective where I acted like I trusted myself and didn't think I trusted myself, but then when I looked back, I was like the way I behaved was as if I did trust myself and I did actually have self-trust. And I think that was a really key kind of thing is, do you trust yourself to kind of like execute, and is what you're doing important, and like are you actually like, you know, is your idea good? Is it worth going after? Like, is the expected value high, right? Like that's what you have to convince yourself of. And I was always very convinced, like, what we're doing is super important. The expected value is extremely high. If what we're doing works, people who work here will be extremely successful. And then I got better at like, I think you want to try to scare people away from your company early on. You don't want to be like, hey, it's going to be great, blah blah blah. You want to be like, startups are fucking hard. I'm gonna try to make it as good as possible for you. I'm gonna try to take care of you. If anything goes wrong, I will find you a new job. That will be my most important thing. But like, I cannot promise you smooth sailing because that's not what startups are like. And so I got better at that and saying like, look, it's not a 9 to 5. I expect people to work hard. The whole team is really high, very highly mission driven, very passionate, very hardworking, great people. But I need to like make sure that you want to be on a team like that because it's not like a normal job. It's not like going to work at Pfizer where you work 9 to 5 and you're off at 3 p.m. on Friday, right? So I think yeah, getting better at just like selling that. And there's a famous, actually I think it's apocryphal, but there's a famous like Shackleton newspaper clipping for his journey where it's like, men wanted low wages, like chance of death high or something like that, right? And that's the classic startup pitch, I think. So, finding those people who just like are on board with that. It's just not for everyone, but the people who are on board with it are incredible. And just like feeling willing to, being open on like it's going to be hard and being okay with losing people because of that. But the people you do get, it's like just being polarizing again. And another piece that really helped too is I just continued to raise the bar for who we hired. And like, one of the things that I believed when I started the company is that the people you recruit are the most important thing. And then I started the company and I was like, fuck, I didn't believe that enough. Like, it's like 10 times more important than I thought. And I think that's just like a really key thing is like, if you really believe something like that, it basically means you have to sacrifice for it. And what that means is like how that kind of played out for us is there was roles still to this day this happens. There's roles that we've hired for over a year where we've just been like we just interviewed 1,000 people and we've gone through 1,000 apps at least, and we just haven't given anyone an offer because there's no one good enough. And so I think that is like a really key thing is to really just keep your bar really high, bring on amazing people, and then they bring on more people like them, and it gets easier actually. So yeah, I think even when it's hard, just like not lowering your bar, because once you start to lower your recruiting bar, it's very hard to raise it back up, I think.
Absolutely. This is advice that like a lot of founders have shared. Um, I'm curious though, especially in biotech, it's very difficult to recruit, right? There's a lot of competition from these big biotech companies, as it is in tech. But I would say that, most young, computer science majors are kind of drawn to startups. So they're temperamentally um, of that sort of persuasion. Whereas in biotech, that tends to be more of like a conservative industry where people get their PhDs and are, much more kind of driven to have career stability and work in industry. What is it that you look for in these early hires, and how do you convince them to, work for you rather than Genentech or Pfizer?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think like in some ways it's become easier to hire in biotech because the market is so bad and there's so many companies doing layoffs. But yeah, especially in like 2021, it was super hard where every company had a shit ton of money, and then like salary. I remember like looking at starting scientist salaries, and it was like 50% higher than what I'd had at my first flagship company, like 4 years, 3 years earlier. Yeah, people right out of their PhD are generally like maybe kind of later career people are a little more conservative, but there's definitely plenty of people who are right out of their PhD who want to change the world. And so I think if you can find those people, but you want to make sure like, biotech is a more conservative field. It does help to have, extra experience because it's just such a hard process in many ways and so many steps along the journey and so so much failure that it's useful to have people who have experienced. Um, but I think you can balance that with advisors, I think, actually, is, so I think, our team is super ambitious, really amazing scientists from the best labs in the proximity field, and people who just like, they don't want to work at Pfizer. And then just like, I'm like, or Genentech, and I'm like, it's, they don't want to be a cog in the wheel. They don't want to have like this like really long career progression. People who are high agency and are able to impact the world and know that, and they just know like if you're at a startup, you're gonna be able, you're gonna be able to kind of, if that's true about you, you can like leverage that much more at a startup than you can somewhere else. So plenty of people like that. And then I think yeah, so I think that's the way I built my team is overall our team is on the younger side, but we've done things in drug discovery that no one else has ever done. And we have a great board of advisors too. And that's a great kind of dynamic where if you get the right advisors, there's people who, they've seen everything, they've seen millions of failures, but they still have a part of them that wants to believe in really changing the world, right? I mean, that's like that's why we're in science and not something else. And you combine that with your energy of a younger team, and I think those can kind of synergize really, really well. And I got to see that at some other startups I worked with, like in grad school, where yeah. So I think, yeah, I do think we have hired overall earlier, like younger team, and sometimes, and that's actually tough. Actually, I think this is another thing where it's hard, partially just because of the narrative, like being a solo founder, where people say being a solo founder is hard. VCs will say that, and then they won't give solo founders money, which makes being a solo founder hard. Like, well, see, all these people fail. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think it's the same thing where like, yes, drug discovery is hard. Yes, like yes, you should have experience, but it's not like if you have a bunch of really smart people who are really motivated, you can bring on the expertise you need and make the right decisions. And that's been a challenge for us in some ways where people look at our team and like the internal team, they're like, who's the people who's like the drug hunter, like who's the person who's brought 15 drugs to the clinic, like how could you be successful if you don't have that? And it's kind of annoying, but also it's just those people aren't going to invest in our company. And I can, and like we know that we've done things that traditional pharma has failed to do. So, we've brought on advisors to help make sure we're not making dumb decisions and to, mitigate that. And for my next fundraising round, I'll bring on at least one of these people internally too. Because it's almost like, I mean, I think we could do everything we need to do, bring our first drug to clinic without hiring any of these people internally. Because we have incredible advisors who've, like Andy Crew, the first employee at Arvinas and CTO of Arvinas, helps us design molecules, right? So we've got people who have been there and done that many, many times. But there's this like, thing where people external are like, oh, well, if they're not on your team, like, how do we know we can like trust you? I think, and I get it. Like being a VC is very hard. Like there's a lot of hard to get. I think they're always looking for as much signal as they can, but I think that will shift in the future where, yeah, I mean, like a really smart person out of their PhD who's ambitious and has access to good advisors, and also maybe just like ChatGPT now has a, this is just massive amount of information available to people now that can help with decision making. And I don't think you need like, I don't think you need like yeah, these like from day one, you need like a super experienced person internal. I definitely think it can help too, by the way. I mean, there's plenty of mistakes that we made early on that a pharma vet would have been like, don't do that. But I think the problem is if you have someone like that, there's too much naysaying, and you need to like really believe in positivity as a founder. You have to balance that well, and you're gonna make mistakes, and you just got to figure out how to calibrate yourself, and make the right decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's there's a bit of a signal versus how much actual help can these advisors provide me dynamic going on as well. Like I know of many founders that just bring on like an advisor who has a lot of credibility and signal, but they struggle to even get them on a call once a month.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? Um, and how to sort of build this advisory board when you're just getting started?
Yeah, I think yeah, that's common. I think we've done that too, and we're definitely that's a really common thing, and sometimes it's just hard to know. So I think like If I was doing it again, I think for all my early advisors, I would start with not equity, but just cash. And then I would be like 6 months in, we'll transition to equity if things go well. Because like we've had people we brought in as advisors, and then yeah, we just never talked to them. And they get a chunk of the company. It's not huge, but feels a little kind of silly. Um, but yeah, now our kind of model of this is just like bring on as many advisors as possible, bring them on as consultants, or you could just say they're SAB members, just give them cash comp and see how it goes, and then you can transition them to it's like very cheap, right? It's like a very simple experiment. Just bring on as many as you can, see who's the most helpful, transition those people to equity and cash comp too if you want. And overall, it's a relatively small part of the burn, but it's really impactful.
Got it. Understood. Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier as well that having a very limited funding pool and being quite short on runway made you more focused. I'm curious, what was the noise that was eliminated? What did you learn from your time being a founder as to what first-time founders typically overestimate versus, what they actually should be devoting their time and energy to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it just forced us to focus. Steve Jobs has a quote, it's like focusing is about saying no. And it was just like we didn't even have the ability to say no because there was no way we could do extra stuff. So it was like the stuff we do has to be the most important thing. And to figure that out, you have to think really hard, right? Think hard, read a lot, talk to a lot of people. So it just kind of forced us to go down that path where the experiments we were doing just had to be very, very critical, important, clearly have some payoff, clearly had good platform disease fit for what we were working on. And I think a challenge is like there's a lot of companies, especially in the VC-led model, where they raise an $80 million seed round and before they have anything, and then they just like waste it on a huge management team and like a few shots on goal on like random stuff. 50% is those things that they should never worked on, right? And so it's like I think it's like the way I think of this is that they scaled before they had platform disease fit. They scaled before they really understood what they should be doing, and we just like were not capable of doing that because we had so little money.
Yeah, a lot of companies that just raise too much too soon and they don't have enough to show for it, and huge bankruptcy uh, would have been
Mm.
better to keep it narrow and slim. I think we can wrap up. Maybe one last question for you would be, if you have a young scientist who's listening and they're ambitious, but they're not certain about, starting a company or just kind of like what should be their path in life, but they might be inspired by what they've heard from you. What's one piece of advice you'd want to leave them with?
One thing that's always been helpful for me is just for whatever you're working on, to make it as ambitious as possible. I think it just like startups are so hard. You're gonna get bogged down at some point, and burnout comes from working on something you don't care about and failing at it, right? And you're gonna fail at your startup at some point, but if you can work on something that you care about, you will avoid burnout. So make sure you're working on something that you really care about, because like there's just no reason to put yourself through the hell of a startup if it's something that's incremental. I think it's the best job in the world. If you can wake up every day and think you're really, moving the lever for something really important. I would say, some people need to jump off the cliff, other people need to read more. I did a little bit of both actually. After I quit my job, before I incorporated the company, I spent 6 months doing nothing but reading papers to really make sure I had a good sense of what I should be doing, to like what targets we should work on, how exactly we should build the platform. So, yeah, I think kind of figure out where you are on that spectrum, and figure out if you need to really go out and look for a co-founder, which I mean, I think it can be really important, or if you just want to jump off the cliff and find a co-founder later on, or whatever. Yeah, just do it, I guess.
And that was a fantastic answer. Thank you for coming on the Nucleate Podcast. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I had a blast talking about this. It's so nice to be able to. I feel like going through a startup, you learn so many things that you only use once, and it's so nice to be able to, maybe talk about it because it feels a little more useful that way. And those are amazing questions. And yeah, thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone who helped me get here too, which there were many, many, many people that I got to learn from and be inspired by. So.
Thanks for listening to the Nucleate Podcast. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to keep up with future episodes. See you next time.